Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are joining us today, and welcome to our fourth online event. Can you hear me okay? Thumbs up? Perfect. All right. So I am Josue Briceno, coordination team lead for the Hacking HR Seattle chapter, principal for HRCitizen.com, and HR director for the Americas at SUSE. And we have an amazing VIP speaker today who will talk about the future of now, leading the future rather than reacting. What an interesting presentation we will have today with Elisha. Can't wait for that. Before I go that far, let's go to the next slide. And let me explain what Hacking HR is. This is a global learning community and information exchange platform created to discuss all things at the intersection of the future of work, technology, organizations, and people, and the role of human resources to create better workplaces. This is a space for learning, collaboration, and sharing. Our purpose is to create the best HR that has ever existed before by creating the best HR practices, which enable organizations to adapt and thrive, which means they are able to effectively solve problems today and in the future. And as you can see now, we are dealing with a pandemic across the world. To achieve this purpose, we focus on two goals: creating the largest global collaborative community of HR business and technology leaders, organizational practitioners, and informing our community of the latest trends in the future of work, technology, and HR through chapter events like this and global events. There are two functions with Hacking HR has targeted. The global Hacking HR function, which serves as the primary brand and provides key resources and programs designing and running global events, and local Hacking HR chapters, which are agile, self-organized teams of partners and members of the local level. The Seattle chapter is an open community, which means that anyone can join us. This chapter is a self-managing community acting within the global Hacking HR groups. So feel free to join our Slack community. And let me go to the next slide. And I am part of the leadership team for the Seattle chapter as coordination team lead. And I am thrilled partnering with Santana Grayson, infrastructure team lead, Brian Buck, comms and content lead, and Stephen Jones, partner for partner. So please put through the chat your LinkedIn information, Facebook or Instagram links so that we can start networking and making new connections right away. Today, I have the privilege to introduce our VIP keynote speaker, Elisha Abade. Elisha is an entrepreneur, future-forward strategist, and creator of the Future of Now. She partners with organizations that range in size from Fortune 500 companies to startups to help leaders make the ever-growing disruption in our world and channel that disruption into tangible results. Her client and partner roster include likes of PricewaterhouseCoopers, Unite Group, Verizon, University of Arizona, and University of Cincinnati. She's a sought-after speaker and facilitator with a dynamic and engaging style who has led from the front of the room at New York Live, Deloitte, BRVO, SHRM, Stanford, and the University of Chicago, among others. She has a TED Talk entitled Pioneering the Future of Work. In a former life, Elisha served as a global director of talent acquisition with Anheuser-Busch InBev and VP of HR at Dow Jones and Company. She has been featured in work with Tony Robbins and Trevor Noah and has been named a leading female futurist by Forbes. She is an instructor of both Stanford University and University of Toronto. She received both her BA and MBA from the University of Chicago. So, well, with no further ado, Elisha, take it away.
Thank you so much for having me here. I am thrilled to join you all today and share the magic and the possibility of the future of now, moving forward in a period of accelerated change. And so while I will be presenting to you and running through a presentation here, what I want to invite you all to do as we're moving along is to put questions in the chat, and I will be sort of weaving along in conversation because this is meant to be a little bit more interactive than simply just talking at. So with that, the future of now, and where are we and how did we even get into this conversation, right? So Josue did an amazing job of introducing me, but I think it's also useful for me to share how all of this started. And my work is largely anchored and inspired by Joseph Campbell. And one of the things that he says is that we must be willing to give up the life that we have planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us. And it was August of 2016, and I'm sitting in a freezing cold conference room in Las Vegas, Nevada, and Peter Diamandis, one of the world's most renowned futurists, gets up onto the stage and starts talking about innovation. Now, this might not seem like a life-changing moment for most people, but I'm kind of a nerd. And so when I hear smart people talk, it's like going to a rock concert. And for me, when he started talking about innovation and change and disruption in logistics and manufacturing and essentially industry as we know and understand it, I was like, wow, this is going to be the most amazing time for us. And then almost instantaneously, it hit me like a lightning bolt. But what are we going to do with all the people? Because the example that he shared was about self-driving trucks, and it turns out that self-driving truck, or that truck driving is the most popular job in 26 to 29 states in the US, depending on the data that you look at. So I began to go down the rabbit hole of the impact on the truckers and truck driving and the communities and the mom and pop gas stations and all of the ancillary industries that grew up around this. My question, what are we going to do with all the people? And this is something that hit me really close to home because I'm born and raised in the city of Detroit, which has many reasons for its ascensions and declines economically, but certainly one of them is the fact that we didn't think preemptively about the impact of technology and work in our working world. And so I started to dig into all of the data underneath what this disruption is and what it's going to mean. And in January of 2017, I put everything I own into storage, except for what fits into a carry-on suitcase, to push my own life to an extreme of uncertainty, to learn about the technologies that are creating this impact, and to learn from those who are masters at managing change, all to come up with answers to that question, how might we, what are we going to do with all the people? But really, like the more sophisticated version of that question is, how might we empower success in the face of great uncertainty and disruption? And then comes pandemic. So talk about putting the pedal to the metal here. And so before we begin to talk about the future of now and how we create it from this moment, let's position ourselves in the moment where we are. And when I say this first, where our starting point is in terms of crisis not as doom and gloom, but crisis as the point in time after which some outcome, good or bad, will occur depending on the actions that we take right now. So March hits, the pandemic itself, so there's a health crisis, and almost immediately the economic constriction that comes after that. And we are now at point 3 with the secondary, tertiary, and continuing waves of economic and health crisis occurring right now. Secondly, where are we in terms of starting point in process? Whatever was happening, we'll call March the starting marker. Whatever was happening prior to the pandemic, we can call our caterpillar stage, that was the old normal. There will be a new normal that we are creating in every action that we are taking right now, but we are still very much in the middle of a process of societal transformation, much accelerated by the pandemic itself. And then thirdly here, let's look at the starting point of disruption. Now, this is not all doom and gloom, by the way, right? I'm just simply sharing where we are in terms of these points of disruption so that we have the tools and the fuel that we need in order to create a future that's better than whatever we were living beforehand. So if we look at the pandemic coming as a lightning bolt of disruption in our world, that certainly occurred, and there has been a lot of change. I think I can certainly speak for myself and my business, and I can speak for only every person with whom I've spoken since the beginning of this. there's been a lot of change. And however, that did not stop the tsunami of disruption that's here and on the horizon that is centered around that question: how might we empower success in the face of great disruption? So I want to share what comprises that tsunami so that we're aware, because this sits smack dab at the center of the future of work. Okay, so the tsunami of change, it's here. It's the impact of technology and work in our working world. It's a shift in our workforce population, and it is an eventual downturn in the economy, which we are in the middle of right now. When these three things come together, there is a convergence of factors that makes the impact of each and every one greater. Right, so technology, what is the impact of that in work in our working world? That 2013 study that I think most of us on this call may have heard of or seen out of Oxford, that says that in the US, 47% of jobs are going to be computerized or taken over by robots in the upcoming years. Now, this is not all doom and gloom, because for every one job that is going to be destroyed, we'll call it, 2.6 jobs will be generated. But what it does mean is that there's going to be a shift and change in what work and working is and means. Secondly, when we look at that shift in workforce population, we're looking, as I'm looking at it, there are two big things that I'm paying attention to. One is a shift in workforce population, which has to do, of course, with baby boomers staying in the workforce longer or retiring, millennials coming in, Gen Z and others after them. But what I'm really looking at here is this massive trend toward contract work and independent workers. And we were seeing the numbers rise anyway, pre-pandemic, of 23% to 34% of the US population. And it is, some data is now telling us that it's possible that 50% of the US workforce will not return to traditional jobs after this pandemic. So what a job means, how we interact with our employees when they aren't actually employees, becomes a different kind of a landscape. And then secondly, this picture that we see on the right is a picture of the Google Loon balloon, which is one of the technologies that's helping bring ubiquitous internet to the entire planet. So what happens when 3.5 to 4 billion people who have never had access to the internet and the educational and entrepreneurial opportunities that it provides come online? What happens when the workforce is truly global? And then, of course, a dip in the economy. And again, we're experiencing one of those now, but what's interesting to think about this is what happens in the convergence of these factors. Okay, so that's that tsunami of disruption that's here and on the horizon. Positioning ourselves in the moment in time, we are like at the finish line for 2020. So all of this like white knuckling, holding on until the end of the year. There will be a flip of some kind when we step into 2021, and within each of our power is the ability to turn it into something better than what was here before. But the starting point is this moment now. And this is one of the most important concepts to pull from this whole conversation, is that the present moment that we are living didn't appear out of nowhere. The present is actually a manifestation of everything that came before it. So whatever our working teams are looking like, engagement in our companies is looking like, whatever life looks like right now is a manifestation of everything that came before, which means that the future is actually created in every decision, movement, action that we take and make right now. So what is the future of now? We're going to decide and discover it together. Now, inside of this conversation, what I hear so often from people is, and I mentioned with that slide that has the caterpillar and the butterfly in this chrysalis space, let's go back to normal. There's a new normal that's here and coming, or wanting to pull toward that. And what I'm seeing with this is that actually it's not a new normal or an old normal or normal, but what people are really looking for right now is certainty in the face of uncertainty. And all of this research that I did around the future of work helped me come up with a framework that provides that certainty and uncertainty, and at the very least creates a starting point that lets us lower our cortisol and begin to thrive in the face of all of this change. And that empowered success framework is mindset, it's education, and it's collaboration. And each of these things has three different layers to it. It has a foundational principle, it has a paradigm shift, and it has the practice itself. So how do we implement it? And given interest of time today, I'm not going to dive incredibly deeply into each of these, but what I am going to do is give you a taste and flavor of each of them, the things that I think are most relevant to taking back to your teams and your organizations, and to help each of you empower yourselves in the face of all of this craziness that continues to happen. So foundational principles, we can think about them as the foundation of a house. The paradigm shifts that are occurring, like this picture here, you go from one kind of horse to another very different kind of horse, but much of how we understand the world and the assumptions that we have that are driving what's happening have shifted and have changed. And then thirdly here, in terms of practice, what are the tools that we can actually use to get out into the world and do something about this? Okay, mindset, education, collaboration. First and foremost, this is the second thing. So besides the idea that the future is created in this moment right now, thing number 2 to walk away with inside of this conversation or from this conversation is the important distinction between being captive to your circumstances or captain of your destiny. And this image here is from the graph from the New York Times in the week that the jobless claims were the worst during the pandemic, right? Which were 10 times as bad as what happened during the worst moment in time of the Great Recession. And I think all of you or everybody here is in HR. And so, you know, I think you want nothing more than to be able to help people or to be able to prevent the hurt that's happening when people lose their jobs during this time. And the distinction between being captive and captain is asking ourselves, why is this happening to me? Which is effectively a disempowered question, or shifting over into, given that we're here, what do we want to create? What can we get into action around and about in order to help others inside of this place and space, right? So that's the distinction between captain and captive. And as the disruption continues to occur in our working world, being able to shift away from, why is this happening to me? Why does my job hate me? Why does my boss hate me? Why is the economy like this? Why are all of these things happening around? Instead of, okay, great, we're here in this situation. What do we want to create? What do we want to do about it? Secondly, here around mindset, looking at, I'm going to share 2 of the paradigm shifts. We are shifting away from a world of or and into a world of and. The world of or, we can think of, you know, how we used to do business, or it was either corporate or entrepreneurial. It was industrial or technological. It was global or local or virtual. Now it's a world of and, where the barriers between what was separate are dissolving. And, you know, I ran global recruiting for Anheuser-Busch InBev. And when I was there, I was part of a 4-person team that created their beer garage in Palo Alto, California. It started out as a small office. It's now a massive innovation center in the middle of Silicon Valley, because they put innovation front and center. But what they realized is that that wasn't enough. And so they've created ZX Ventures and other entrepreneurial endeavors to invest in disruptive companies in the beverage space. So they are at once corporate and entrepreneurial. And this idea and this notion applies both for overall business strategy and for problem solving within our organizations. There is no more, oh, it's finance's job to handle this, or marketing's job to handle that. Where are there opportunities for us to dissolve the barriers between one distinction and the other? And then secondly, in terms of paradigm shifts, we are moving away from a world that was linear and into a world that is exponential. Linear, and what this means for our planning, for our strategy, for our careers. The past of strategy was incremental, and fundamentally driven by the question, what can we logically do with what we already have and what we already know? And so this leads to budgets that are 10% over last year's. If something goes wrong, it doesn't go off the rails incredibly quickly. We have time to sort of manage it. Whereas when you shift over to exponential thinking and planning, it has that dynamic of exponential, which feels like nothing, nothing, something, everything all at once. And that dynamic of nothing, nothing, something, everything. So if you're in an industry and you say, okay, great, Elisha, all of this disruption, all of these big changes in the market, they might be happening over there. But over here, there's nothing going on. You can just rest assured that you are in the nothing, nothing part of that nothing, nothing, something, everything dynamic. Disruption is coming. So how do you prepare for it, and how do you plan for it? the main reason that I left the corporate world was to solve initially for the problem that most of the planet still finds itself disengaged or highly disengaged at work. And so with that and looking at that, how do we create spaces and places where people can thrive in their working environment? And one of the strategic shifts is moving away from a career that was linear in thinking, what can I logically do with what I know and what I've done, and shifting over into exponential or planting your flag thinking about your career, where you take a few steps back and you ask yourself, what do I want to create? What kind of impact do I want to have? How do I want to use my life? And you align your skills, resources, and talents behind creating that thing, right? Okay, great. So linear to exponential. And then here, practices, I just want to share a couple. Okay, the distinction between business partner and business, right? So implicit language is everything. Language constructs the world that we live in. It creates our reality. And so implicit in the word business partner, when we're talking about HR business partners, means that we are not of the business, we are a partner with the business, which creates a separation, and we keep wondering why there is no seat at the table. Well, it's because you're telling yourself that you're not at the table. Whereas if you shift over into being a component of the business and clearly articulating the alignment of what you're up to with the commercial ends of the organization, with the people ends of the organization, then you make that shift and you are able to achieve faster, more quickly, and take the strategic place that HR will need, and I will dive into that, to have in order to have successful organizations moving forward in this. And then finally here in the mindset piece, the distinction between being the cavalry, waiting for the cavalry to come and save us, and us being the heroes of our own adventure. So often we talk about the future of work or the future of HR, the future of all of these things out here, as though, or even the new normal, as though there is some committee of people in the future designing what we're going to arrive at some point. And when we get to that future point, whatever that is, that they're just going to open the door and welcome us in. There is no committee there waiting at the future time. It is up to us to create it right now. We are the ones who are doing this. So now is the moment to seize the opportunity for leadership. So that's mindset. Secondly, we move into education. Foundational principle of education, we move away from being subject matter experts and into subject matter students. There have been a lot of articles lately around, that shift, which is not so new, but shift between being an I-shaped professional that has deep subject matter knowledge in one thing versus a T-shaped professional. IDEO has been working with T-shaped people for, as long as the design school at Stanford has been around, certainly, where you have a deep knowledge of something, but breadth of knowledge across a whole series of things. And the degree of disruption that's here and is going to occur is so great that we're going to need to keep learning in order to keep thriving. It's just that simple. The old days of unquestioned leadership, gone. And so that paradigm shift moves away from this world of diploma and done. I go to school, I study something, I never have to study again. We shift over into lifelong learning. And the practice of that inside of education is moving away from a world of being right and into a world of being resilient. We're not going to know all the answers anymore. It's just that simple, because we haven't faced the things that we're facing right now. And even back in, this data was compiled in 2018, but published in 2019, the shift in executive perception. So IBM interviews executives to see what are the most prized skills that people will need. And before it was analytics and STEM and basic computer stuff, so hard skills that you can measure. Whereas the shift moves over into, first and foremost, of course, mental agility and flexibility. And this is only going to increase. The World Economic Forum has a whole list of creativity and mental flexibility and agility and connection and communication as the competencies that we'll need to develop moving forward. So if you're leading a learning and development organization, you're leading training inside of your company, these are the kinds of things to think about. So not only lifelong learning as relates to computer programming. You know, digital transformation, by the way, is not computer programming, but it's how you develop your thinking to be resilient and creative and connected moving forward. And then secondly, here in terms of practice, recruiting moves away from recruiting at the right schools and shifting over into recruiting the right people. And we've already seen, we're going to see massive disruption in the higher education market, which was starting already, but thanks to this forced school from home, what happens when you don't need a degree anymore to work at the best companies in the world? And it's all about the skills that you are able to exercise, right? And it's already, Ernst & Young, Apple, Google, several companies have already removed the criterion for having graduated from a four-year university. So what happens when school isn't the marker anymore? And by the way, it turns out that college performance isn't actually a very good indicator of professional success anyway, but that's another conversation for another day. Thirdly, so mindset education, collaboration, foundational principles. We are moving away from a world of strict competition and into a world of mutually assured thriving. So past of work was very much zero-sum game. If I'm winning, you're losing, a fixed pie of market share, and we just have to kill our competition. And what's happening is that the degree of disruption out in the marketplace is so great that we need to come together with those who were formerly our competitors in order to thrive. And this picture on the right here is from day 91 of that journey that I was in, that I was walking around with my suitcase. The former dean of the business school at Yale invited me to participate in this meeting that he had been holding for over 5 years at that point, of the deans and directors from the world's top business schools, many of the world's top business schools. And they had been coming together over a series of years to talk about challenges in management education and what's going on in the marketplace. And as a result of this, this continued meeting and continued conversations, what they actually did as a group was come together and create a master's program that's half the time of a traditional MBA, significantly lower cost, and allows an international component. This was back when you could travel, but allows an international component inside of it so that students can experience several of the campuses. And in theory, they're competing for the same pool of students, but because they saw a bigger challenge out in the marketplace, they then came together in order to thrive in the face of that challenge. So secondly, here in terms of paradigm shift, we're moving away from a world of scarcity and into a world of abundance. This goes for opportunity, this goes for market share, this goes for everything that you can think of. So scarcity, zero-sum game, fixed pie economics. If I'm winning, you're losing. When we are negotiating, somebody's compromising, which really just means that somebody is losing. Rather than shifting over into a world of abundance where everybody really wins, right? And not that, if any of you are fans of The Office, not the win-win-win sort of negotiation thing, but really this place and space where when I improve myself and I add the abilities or skills that I have developed to the betterment of the whole, the value of the entire thing grows, and vice versa. So we call this a bubbly economics model. When you put warm water in the bubble bath, the thing grows. When you put cold water in the bubble bath, the thing shrinks, right? So how we contribute to the whole begins to matter in terms of how we generate and create value. Paradigm shift, them versus us to everyone. Here in the United States for years, the pandemic of racism has been around for 400 years. This summer has brought it front and center again into the conversation, and particularly as leaders in HR, we have the ability and the opportunity to create the companies and create the spaces where everyone is truly valued equally. So this is a leading paradigm shift. In collaboration, I'm just going to touch on two of these in interest of time here, but those most relevant to the HR space. When we look at the practice of collaboration, we're moving away from pyramid structures and hierarchical models where everybody has their box and whoever is above you on the level of the hierarchy is, can tell you what to do, is your boss. Those who are on the bottom just have to listen and do whatever you're told. We're shifting over into a model of leadership that I call an infinity model of leadership, which is much more flexible. So today, let's say we're talking about the future of work. I would be the leader because I happen to have more knowledge, information, experience in that space. But tomorrow, because we're talking about graphology, then Josue would be the leader of that conversation. And each of us in our leadership both have to have the capacity to lead and motivate and inspire and get the results together with our teams, and also in the times and spaces and places when we are not leading, step away, which requires a totally different kind of leadership and learning around ego and power and a whole series of other kinds of things, right? And then finally here, in terms of collaborative practice, we are shifting away from a model of career. So if you're doing career pathing, career planning, recruitment, hiring, retention, all of these kinds of things, we're moving away from the ladder model, one track, one lane, one area of focus for the entire career, and we're shifting over into this values-based career model, which I call the mosaic career, which is rooted in the answers that each of us have to those questions. What do we want to create? What kind of impact do we want to have? How do we want to use our lives? And it becomes a multifaceted expression of who we are as individuals, and has the added bonus of creating fulfillment and happiness, which then will drive your engagement inside of your organizations. Right, so mindset, education, collaboration, the three-part framework there. I want to touch briefly on resilience as we're wrapping up this conversation, because this year, or in September and October, I ran an experiment, right? And so the importance of resilience inside of this conversation, it's like mindset, education, collaboration with the resilience as either the foundational, it's like the sandwich here. But I decided to run a conversation experiment to see what was happening in our world. And in the space and place of that, what I did is I reached out to all of my connections on LinkedIn, 4,700 people, to invite them into a 20-minute conversation, to ask everybody the same 5 questions. How are we connected? What's going on in your world? What do you see as the biggest opportunity? What do you see as the biggest challenge right now? And from your point of view, what do you see as what piece of advice would you share for a fellow human being who is looking out over the next 18 to 24 months? Sent out all these invitations. I ended up speaking with more than 160 people from all over the world, from senior executives of publicly traded companies to interns at small universities in the middle of Brazil. And the theme that came out of all of these conversations, and I will be sharing broader research findings in January, right? The theme that came out of this was resilience and the need to build it. And resilience, as I'm dividing it here, and I'm just going to share a couple of points from it, is divided up into self-empowerment, fearlessness, and connection. Right? And the importance of resilience. Of the 160 plus conversations that I had, I can count on one hand the number of conversations that were not related to mental health, resilience, finding it, needing it, having it, loneliness, combating loneliness, connection, need for connection. So this is like a cry out to and for those in the HR community to truly support their organizations. Right? But looking at self-empowerment, this notion of protecting the core, I've got this versus no as a complete sentence, and learning how and helping your employees build the tool set and skill set to create strong, powerful boundaries and agreements in the place and space of this in order to avoid burnout. Because here's the deal. If you have an organization that has half of your employees melting down, you're not going to be doing very well in the marketplace. So this becomes a critical strategic imperative. On the fearlessness front, forcing a finish, right? Getting everything done as much as you can at the last minute, not sleeping, versus, taking a note from D Nice and letting it breathe. I used to think that there were 2 kinds of energies in the working world. There was a declaring energy, I'm going to do something, and then there's a doing energy. I'm going to do all the things to get it done. But there's actually a third, which is to allow some space for creativity to come into play. And then finally here on connection, and we'll open it up for questions. sharing your story and listening to your employees, productivity does not equal engagement. So all of those productivity numbers that went through the roof, March, April, okay, great. And you better believe that your best employees are sitting home on their couches wondering, like, is this all there is? And do I really want to be working here? Why did people dive into productivity? Because at the beginning of the pandemic, people were afraid of losing their jobs. So they're going to do the best that they can to succeed at them. And secondly, it's the only thing they can control, or one of the few things they can control, right? But that's not the same thing as engagement. And that's something that's actually driving burnout. Connection, secondly, however you might be connecting with employees right now, whether it be text message or platforms of any kind, checking off a box of having sent an "Are you okay?" message is not the same thing as being in conversation and listening actively, empathetically to what's happening in their world, which is what ended up happening inside of these conversations that were supposed to only be 20 minutes long. But this one that I had with a woman who runs operations for a structured finance association, it was so connected that it bleeds over into well over that a 30-minute time block. And then finally here, looking at building our communities. So shifting away from a world of networking, which was a transactional activity, driven fundamentally by what we can get from other people, versus community building, which is all about how we can discovering what's going on in somebody else's world, and then helping them solve the challenges that they have. It's all about giving, right? So moving away from get and getting into give. So integration, what do we do with all this information? Mindset, education, collaboration, resilience. The world is changing, all the disruption. What are we gonna do? First and foremost, the choice between being an ostrich or an eagle, right? We can stick our head in the sand and wish it would all go away and hope that the committee of the future will be done with their work by the time we get there. Or we can have a look at what's happening with the eye of empowering ourselves and our organizations from the perspective of the eagle and say, okay, what do we need to do? What actions can we take to move forward? Secondly, shifting away from the world, the way that things were, into the future of now. We are not stuffing humanity back into the box that we were in prior to the pandemic. It's just not going to happen. The laws of physics won't allow it. The laws of physics is expansion, not contraction, right? So what is the future that we're creating? What is the new world that we are choosing to create in every space and place and moment? And of course, going back to what we started with, the starting point is now. The present is a manifestation of everything that's happened up until this point. So now is the moment when we decide the future. And since we must be willing to give up the life that we have planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us, the big question is, are you willing to do that? So with that, I will stop my share and open this up. Josue, I don't know if you're going to.
That's amazing, Elisha. All the information that you have shared with us, it's outstanding. I mean, I'm trying to digest all of this information, but it's amazing, all the content that you have shared with us. So there's a question in the chat from Ellie. It says, very interested about the 50% not returning to regular workforce. I totally understand why, but how did this conclusion come about?
Yeah, so the first person who I heard this from is Carl Camden, who is the former CEO of Kelly Services and the founder of IPSI US, which is a US Association for Independent and Contract Workers, which is really helping push legislation that will help contemplate this much less employee-focused, much more independent worker-focused world. And if you look at the data prior to the pandemic, we were already moving from mid 2010s, right? 23% to 34% of the US workforce population doing independent or contract work, whether by choice or by force, right? That was already moving up from 34 to 45%, even independent of the pandemic. Now, what we're seeing now and what we're going to see, so the federal relief loans came in, so many jobs were able to be saved in an interim time, but what we're seeing, especially with the larger organizations like the airlines, since there wasn't a hook into keeping employees for receiving that money, those folks are going on furlough and then to layoff. The industries around like hospitality, restaurants, and other things, those employees may or may not, depending on how and when the restaurant industry kicks back, will be certainly quite some time, if not that. So all of those factors together push us toward that 50%, which really then brings in the opportunity of sharing, and one of the distinctions that I didn't share, but the paradigm shift in education away from industrial and into entrepreneurial. So how do we embody the skills that we need in order to thrive when a job is no longer a job in the way that we were told it would be?
That's amazing. And Elisha, you know, in HR, we are transition from human capital management over to human experience management. You know, the drawback are a focus on operational HR data like employee turnover and all those stats. But what it's happening now is more about what the employee experience is, instead of the what, the why. So I was just amazed with all the information that you shared. But do you have any best practice to help HR leaders transition from human capital management over to human experience management?
Yeah. So so I often equate, and we can use recruiting as a concrete, tactile, tangible example, right? And by the way, this also goes for helping the conversation around how do you equate HR practices to business practices. So this is also a concrete example of that. But recruiting, if you can imagine the recruiting candidate experience like a customer experience or journey, from the first moment they come in contact with the organization, which can either be through your website or a social media post or somebody who works there, to the moment that they are hired, and then 3 months, 9 months until they're full-time employees. What are all of the touch points? What are the communications that are happening with them? What is the experience of each and every one of those things? And increasingly more so, does it mirror the ease of experience that occurs in every other consumer transaction in the world? I go to my phone and I can buy everything that I want at the click of a button so quickly, but if I am still filling out paper stuff for a recruiting process, the distinction and the difference between that is enormous, right? So thinking about what a candidate's experience might be, as an aspirational goal, what if even the people who you rejected from your recruitment process, even they were out in the world evangelizing your company? What would you need to do to the recruitment process in order for that to occur? So that's a tangible example as has to do with recruitment. But design thinking is a fantastic strategy. It is a consumer or end user focused technique to discover what people's experiences are in the organization. So asking the people themselves what they want to do instead of inventing a solution for a public that may or may not want your solution seems like a great place to go to.
Yeah, that's amazing, Elisha. Thanks for sharing that best practice. We have more questions coming from the graded audience. We have Rebecca. Can you share any strategies that have been effective as you work with more traditional-minded leadership on shifting to these new ideas about engagement, well-being, collaboration, etc.?
Yeah, so I find there's a game that I had to learn in order to achieve some of the things that I wanted to achieve, which I think might be useful to share. It's called You Say, They Hear. So when I first started this work around the future of work, right? I had put everything into storage. Like my entire life is immersed in this, the academic research, my moving around, like the everything, okay? And so I'm 4 months into this journey, and I go back to my alma mater to give a talk on the future of work and the possibilities of the new economy. So I am excited. Half of the room is faculty and staff. Other half of the room is students. And I start talking about disruption and change and all these things that are happening. And one half of the room, which is the faculty and staff, are, arms crossed, frowning, looking down, and the students are like deers in the headlights. And what I realized is that because I'm excited about the disruption. I see disruption as opportunity and change. So that's the space that I'm playing in. What I had to realize, and this was taught to me by one of the guys who runs EBV, the big marketing firm. He said, Elisha, when you say disruption and change and uncertainty, all people are hearing is invalidation and threat and not good enough. And so with that knowledge, I had to learn to speak and to share about these ideas in a way that made them inviting instead of fear inciting. And I share that story because getting or convincing other executives to align with these new ideas is less about whether or not they're good ideas and more about how we're communicating them. Can you align the language that you're using to a more finance focused or results focused? Can you bring data? And generally it's about bringing data to the table. And although in your heart, and this happens a lot in HR, you really want to help the people, and it's about the people, and it is about the people. But if you come to the table talking about the people in that way, it's not going to have the same impact. It's simply not. So do you want to be right about caring about the people, or do you want to get the results that you need to actually take care of the people?
Exactly. That's all I'm talking about. So there's another question from Wendy. Given the statistic of 50% of the workforce not returning back to traditional jobs, I would love to hear your perspective on how this will affect work culture and tips for creating a cohesive culture when the people on your team are not technically employees.
Yes, this is a beautiful question, right? Because you get to the crux of one of the massive shifts, massive paradigm shifts that, in the practice with all of this future stuff, right, is even if your organization doesn't have the cutting edge technology or any of these things, the more you can understand about what is here and what's coming and align to it, even in principle and thought and philosophy, the more easily you'll be able to surf the wave of change instead of getting hit by it. Okay, so we are shifting away from a world of employee management, which was the basic premise of every single business strategy that you have ever learned. The basic idea is that you are managing a group of employees who are incentivized in a certain way to achieve results in a certain way. But what happens when your best employees don't work for you anymore? We move away from employee management and into talent management. Right. And so and Carl Camden also said this in an interview that I did with him, if you're giving your temporary employees the last parking spot in the garage and an entry card that doesn't work, you're not going to keep them for very long. So rather than seeing it as this distinction, right, either they're employees or they're not, and we treat them as two sort of different sets of people, how might we actually channel this into engaged independent contractors who feed our workforce, right, with new ideas, do you really want people who are there? The world is changing this much. Do you really want people who are there for 27 years, right? Could it be valuable to have somebody from other places and spaces in the organization? But yes, you are right. We're moving away from employee management and into talent management.
Fantastic. I can't wait to have you in the Brazil chapter, Elisha, in 2021. So this has been fantastic. It's been a great conversation. And before we wrap up, there's a last question from Pfeiffer. Vocabulary gaps between different line of business inside a company can change the tone of communication quickly. Would you see as a strategy in future state that a communication plan moves into LOV specific approach to bridge that gap and create better engagement with executives and frontline workforces?
Yeah, hands down. When I was at ABI, part of the reason that I helped co-found the Innovation Lab, I was the only non-marketing executive that went to marketing camp with the marketing team at Stanford and other places, because if you can get into the wonderings and the curiosity of what's happening in other divisions of the business and you can get into the conversations that others are having and understand that vocabulary, then you can begin to position and align what's going on in HR and how all of the practices of HR begin to support that organization. And that will really shift that business partner to business transition, and will become increasingly more important because, you know, like it or not, ladies and gentlemen, the artificial intelligence that's coming is going to take care of all of the procedural, transactional HR activities. So you're going to want to be shifting over into the stuff that's more strategic anyway.
Fantastic. You know, there are so many takeaways here, Elisha. I can't, you know, follow all of them in just 45 minutes. But, you know, what really caught my attention was your observation about let it breathe. Okay.
Let it breathe, yeah.
Yeah. So connection, make it personal. Wow. Now that we are living in a artificial world, you know, that's probably instrumental for the success of every single employee and leader in this organization. So when it comes to integration, being an ostrich instead of an eagle, I mean, that resonates strongly enough to me. So I am with you. I want to break paradigms. This is a great opportunity for every single HR practitioner across the world to break paradigms. And I love what you said about it. So thank you very much, Elisha. It's been such a pleasure having this fantastic conversation with you. And thank you to all our participants who joined us today. So if there are no more questions in the chat, I will finish this conversation today. Don't forget to put your contact information through so that we can start connecting each other. So it's the right time now. Thank you very much, Elisha. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful holiday season. Stay safe. Let it breathe.
Thank you.
Thank you.